All right. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, good morning to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that everybody is having a great and wonderful morning. I want to ask if you know how to share this broadcast today. I believe it's going to be a broadcast that is enlightening for others as well as for yourself. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Good morning, hubby. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Thank you, Pastor Ben, for inviting followers. And I'm going to see if I can write a message up here for my Facebook Live people. All right. All right, so I got a pinned note up there for Facebook Live, and then thank you all as well for sharing with your followers. I'm probably going to be drinking a lot this morning because I have a scratchy throat, so I want to make sure that I'm not struggling to read this morning. We do have a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right into what we're reading for today. We're going to finish up the chapter on the gathering storm and the nature of Africa before the Atlantic slave trade, in Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, slavery and the rise of European capitalism. All right. And so, all right. And then we're going to be reading chapter 1 of Dick Gregory's book, and I'm going to try to get through as much of chapter 1 as I possibly can today. All right, so let's jump right into Africa before the Atlantic slave trade. We stopped at the part where we were talking about Mansa Musa and how he visited Timbuktu and what Timbuktu was like as he went on a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, and the writer is describing how other people knew about the greatness of what was in Africa. They knew about the libraries, they knew about the schools, they knew about those who were brilliant and enlightened educators of the time. Excuse me. So this is where we are. We'll start at, let's see, the description of Mansa Musa. We'll start there. The German writer Henry Bath, in his famous work Travels and Discoveries in North and Central Africa, calls Askia the Great one of the most brilliant and enlightened administrators of all times. He reorganized the army of Songhai, improved the system of banking and credit, and made the city-states of Gao-Walata, Timbuktu, and Guinea into intellectual centers. Awesome. Thank you for watching. Prophet Lakia, who is viewing us by Facebook Live with an audience. Timbuktu during his reign was a city of more than 100,000 people, a city filled to the top, says a chronicler of the time, with gold and dazzling women. Askia encouraged scholarship and literature. Students from all over the Muslim world came to Timbuktu to study grammar, law, and surgery at the University of Sankore. Scholars came from North Africa and Europe to confer with learned historians and writers of this black empire. Many books were written and a Sudanese literature developed. Leo Africanus, who wrote one of the best-known works on the Western Sudan, says, in Timbuktu, there are numerous judges, doctors, and clerics, all receiving good salaries from the king. He pays great respect to men of learning. There's a big demand for books and manuscript imported from Barbary, which was North Africa. More profit is made from the book trade than from any other line of business. So these people were serious about learning. They were serious about education. Take a look at what has happened to the ancestors of, good morning, the ancestors of those from the past, and see how much that has been destroyed in terms of making people of color more concerned about sports and entertainment. Not saying anything is wrong with sports or arts, okay, because I did athletics, okay, and I am an artist. But the emphasis in the past was on learning and education and knowledge. All right. After the death of Askia the Great in 1528, the Songhai Empire began to lose its strength and its control over its vast territory. When the Songhai Empire collapsed after the capture of Timbuktu and Gayo by the Moroccans in 1591, the whole of the Western Sudan was devastated by the invading troops. The Sultan of Morocco, El Mansur, had sent a large army with European firearms across the Sahara to attack the once powerful empire of Songhai. The army did not reach Timbuktu until 1591. The prosperous city of Timbuktu was plundered by the army of freebooters. A state of anarchy prevailed. The University of Sankore, which had stood for over 500 years, was destroyed, and the faculty exiled to Morocco. The greatest Sudanese scholar of that day, Ahmed Baba, was among those exiled. Baba was a scholar of great depth and inspiration. He was the author of more than 40 books on such diverse themes as theology, astronomy, ethnography, and biography. His rich library of 1,600 books was lost during his expatriation from Timbuktu. So, people like myself who like knowledge, who like to collect knowledge, people who have extensive libraries, authors, scholars, these are the people that when someone comes to invade and destroy a nation, they're going to attack them first. Let that sink in. They're going to attack your writers. They're going to attack your authors. They're going to attack your journalists. They're going to attack your librarians. In other words, they're going to attack the knowledge keepers. That is one of the things that's happening in America that people can't seem to understand. If you're attacking the press, you're attacking the people who write and record and keep record. So I don't care if you're on the right side of the fence. I don't care if you're on the left side of the fence. That should concern you. That we have an administration that is consistently attacking the press. All right? So put a plug right there and keep that in mind. Okay? Anytime you see people trying to attack the press or suppress knowledge or destroy knowledge or destroy records so they can rewrite the story, that is a problem. Okay? I'm going to keep going. Timbuktu provides the most tragic example of the struggles of the West African states and towns as they strove to preserve what was once their golden age. The Arabs, the Berbers, and the Tuaregs from the north showed them no mercy. Timbuktu had previously been sacked by the Tuaregs as early as 1433, and they had occupied it for 30 years. Between 1591 and 1593, the Tuaregs once more occupied and looted Timbuktu. Thus, Timbuktu, once the queen city of the Western Sudan with more than 200,000 inhabitants and the center of a powerful state, degenerated into a shadow of its former stature. Now, West Africa entered a sad period of decline. During the Moorish occupation, wreck and ruin became the order of the day. When Europeans arrived in this part of Africa and saw these conditions, they assumed that nothing of order and value had existed in these countries. The past golden ages are part of the history that the exploiters of Africa want the world to ignore. The great Ghanaian scholar Dr. Joseph Danquah outlined the pre-slavery history of Africa in his introduction to the book United West Africa, or Africa at the Bar of the Family of Nations, when he said, By the time Alexander the Great was sweeping the civilized world with conquest after conquest, from Sharonia to Gaza, from Babylon to Kabul, by the time this first of the Aryan conquerors was learning the rudiments of war and government at the feet of philosophic Aristotle, by the time Athens was laying on the foundations of modern European civilization, the earliest and greatest Ethiopian culture had already flourished and dominated the civilized world for over 4 centuries and a half. Imperial Ethiopia had conquered Egypt and founded the 25th dynasty, and for a century and a half, the central seat of civilization in the known world was held by the ancestors of the modern Negro, maintaining and defending it against the Assyrians and Persian empires of the East. Thus, at the time when Ethiopia was leading the civilized world in culture and conquest, East was East, but West was not, and the first European Olympiad was as yet to be held. Rome was nowhere to be seen on the map, and 16 centuries were to pass before Charlemagne would even rule in Europe and Egbert become first king of England. Even then, history was to drag on for another 700 weary years before Roman Catholic Europe could see fit to end the Great Schism, soon to be followed by the disturbing news of the discovery of America and by the fateful rebirth of the youngest of world civilizations. In this young civilization, a need for slavery was created. This need had an unforeseen effect upon African people, the magnitude of which continues to be experienced to the present day. When the Europeans first came down the west coast of Africa, they were first treated as guests by unsuspecting Africans whom they would later enslave. When the Africans began to suspect that the intentions of the Europeans were not good, in most cases it was too late, and they did not have the modern weapons of that day to defend themselves. In his book, Ghana, the Morning After, K. Budu Akwa explains the effort of one king of the country that would later be called the Gold Coast, now Ghana, to save his people from the slave trade. His name was Nana Kwamena Ansa. His attempt to discourage the Portuguese from settling in his country was met with force. The following is Budu Akwa's explanation of his effort. And yes, Prophet Lakia, you made an excellent point there. They used so-called hospitality to lure people in to being captured. Our forefathers' antipathy to imperialism is exemplified by the speech of Nana Asa, who foresaw clearly that they were going to be called upon to prey on one another, to be left helpless, disorganized, and demoralized. Tell me what has changed. Just think about it. If in order to survive, you are going to be called to prey upon your sister, your brother, your leader, your mother, you're going to be pitted against each other for survival and left helpless, disorganized, and demoralized. Somebody tell me what has changed. Because we just saw that play out with a sports anchor, right? They reprimanded her for speaking the truth, and then they tried to call on fellow black anchors to step in and take her place. And those fellow black anchors wised up and refused to take her place. Probably for that actually was a defining moment. All of us in the black community know what that was about. Okay? So you won't be the acquiescing Negro. Let's see if we can find some more. Because now if we can find some more, then we can fire you and we'll just use these people over here. But The other anchor said, "Not today, Satan. Not today." Gonna keep reading. Our forefathers' antipathy to imperialism is exemplified by the speech of Nana Assa. As we said, he foresaw clearly that the African leaders were going to be pitted against each other and called to prey upon each other in order for the slave trades to work. His speech has been quoted by the late Mensa Sarba, Dr. DeGraff Johnson, and others, and it is worth quoting once more from W. W. Claridge's History of the Gold Coast and Ashanti, for it shows equally well the development of the Akan language, its poetry, which is as perfect and musical as any Latin or Roman language, and if the richness of a language can be an index to the eloquence of the people, it is a sure indication of a balanced and highly developed mental equipment. In his speech to Diego de Azambuia, commander of the Portuguese expedition, this is what King Ansa had to say. And we are almost done for today with this book. He said, "I am not insensible to the high honor which your great master, the Chief of Portugal, has this day conferred upon me. His friendship I have always endeavored to merit by the strictness of my dealings with the Portuguese, and by my constant exertions to procure an immediate lading for the vessels. But never until this day did I observe such a difference in the appearance of his subjects. They have hitherto been meanly attired, were easily contented with the commodity they received, and so far from wishing to continue in this country, were never happy until they could complete their landing and return. Now I remark a strange difference. A great number, richly dressed, are anxious to be allowed to build houses and to continue among us. Men of such eminence, conducted by a commander who from his own account seems to have descended from God, who made day and night, can never bring themselves to endure the hardships of this climate, nor would they here be able to procure any of the luxuries that abound in their own country. The passions that are common to us all men will therefore inevitably bring on disputes, and it is far preferable that both our nations should continue on the same footing as hereto have done, allowing your ships to come and go as usual. The desire of seeing each other occasionally will preserve peace between us. The sea and land, being always neighbors, are continually at variance and contending. Who shall give way? The sea with great violence attempting to subdue the land, and the land with equal obstinacy resolving to oppose the sea." What is he saying? He's saying, as long as we don't have to see y'all continually coming over here to our coast and our territory, we're going to be all right. But just like in nature, just like sea borders and land borders are constantly pressing up against each other, sometimes the sea wins, hello, hurricanes, and sometimes the land prevails. But he was saying, I'm noticing that you guys want to put down roots here. And if you do that, it's going to create some problems. Okay? The Portuguese were not impressed by the eloquence of King Ansa's speech. They forced their way into his country and built the first permanent slave trading settlement in West Africa. The year was 1482. K. Buddha Aqua explains the tragedy in the following statement. This was the beginning of European colonization, the beginning of the hunting ground for procuring slave labor, the disruption of our religion, our social systems, the loss of respect for our forefathers, all these things being taken away without anything of value being put in their place. It is evident then that European colonization was instrumental in bringing about the decline of the third of Africa's golden ages. Therefore, this history of exploitation and the responsibility for the present condition of the societies of the third golden age are attributed to the greed and imperialistic goals of the European nations. Now, this gentleman is not just saying this. If you go to the National Museum, Smithsonian National Museum, which I'm actually going to put up some more videos today. You'll see them on my Daring Dialogues page. And also, if you're my Facebook friend, you can view them on my Facebook page. You will see on the walls, it talks about all of the European countries. It talks about how many people they stole, put on ships. And then it also talks about how many people actually survived them being stolen. All right? So again, we were not slaves to begin with. Your ancestors were not slaves to begin with. They were stolen goods. They were stolen human beings. And because somebody decided to operate in self-delusion to try to convince themselves that they were not stealing the souls of human beings, they came up with a whole science, right, that was endorsed by religion to say it's okay to entrap and sell these humans because we don't think they're human anyway. All right? So as Dick Gregory famously likes to say, that was what that was about. All right? So next week we're going to go into chapter 3 here, which is new enemies disguised as friends. New enemies disguised as friends, which is actually a really good topic because we have the same thing going on right now. Lots of new enemies disguised as friends. And Black America needs to understand everybody is not your friend. They're just not. You like for them to be. As that king, you know, he wanted to have a friendly, equal plane trading commerce agreement going on with other countries, but other countries were not trying to be equal. They saw an opportunity, all right, to be predatory. That is what happened. And so we cannot erase history. We need to understand history so that we don't repeat it. Right? All right. We're moving on. We're going to be reading chapter 1. We already read Dick Gregory's introduction and he was going in. So today we're going to start chapter 1, Defining Moments in Black History, reading between the lies. So let me put on my glasses and see what time I got. All right. We've got a good 35 minutes, 34 minutes, and then we'll close up. So I'm going to try to get through as much of chapter 1 as I can today. Searching for Freedom. Chapter 1. Dick Gregory says this. It was in the New York Times that there are 1.5 million black men missing. They are not in jail. I couldn't imagine where they were until I saw the movie Get Out. Let me just say this real quick. African American people, please check on your relatives. Check on the ones you haven't heard from in a while. Give them a call. Take a visit. African American people, should your relative pass away, please make sure that their organs are not missing. Make sure you check on that. Because guess whose organs are seen as the absolute best? Black folks. Oh, and if you're thinking about being an organ donor and you actually put that on your license, when you're checked, they know who are the organ donors that are black people. So if you're thinking about donating your organs, how about you do that in a will or a living trust? Don't put it on your license. Y'all are trying to figure out how do they know that certain people are organ donors. And I'm not talking about stuff that is not recorded, all right? There's actual records of people being killed, especially in black urban neighborhoods, because they figure nobody's going to miss you anyway, all right? People being killed, and then next thing you know, oh, they just happen to be an organ donor, so-and-so can now get their organ. We need to be asking the question, why was Kenneka Jenkins found in a freezer to begin with? That's a whole other broadcast. But you guys better pay attention. And those of you who call yourselves gangsters, guess what? Real gangsters find out who's actually murdering all the people in the neighborhood and why. I'm from the hood, and I can tell you, we weren't going around murdering everybody in our neighborhood. Louisiana, guess what they just found? Or supposedly found, but actually they still don't know who is doing it. 2 black men, one working, who walked the same pattern every single night. Hint, hint, change your pattern if you're a walker. He walked the same route every single night from work to home, was shot execution style. The other man, a couple more nights after that, homeless man, was shot execution style. So, in case you didn't realize what's happening in America right now, there's a purge going on. And we've talked about this before. It is an unofficial purge happening. This is why people are not going to jail for killing black people. And so we can act as if we don't understand what time of day it is, but that doesn't make it any less concerning and any less true. So my admonishment to you is to wake up and care about the people around you. Wake up and care about your neighborhood. Wake up and care about your family. This is not the time to be having wars between each other. I don't care if you don't like Bobo and Skeet Skeet on the 3rd block. You better come together and figure it out. That's all I got to say. I'm going to keep reading because we ain't even in the beginning of the 1st chapter. But do your research. Do your research on organ stealing and Chicago. Just type in organ stealing and Chicago. Organ stealing and Detroit. And just hit search and see what you find. Gonna keep reading. Everyone knows that slavery wasn't right. Not just human slavery, but all forms of slavery are wrong. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I am actually very glad that Dick Gregory has gone on to his glory, because he's about to make a lot of people angry with this book. But it is what it is. All right? He says, not just human slavery, but all forms of slavery are wrong. Folks that own dogs and cats and other animals should recognize that they are also practicing a form of slavery. The same universal God that made me and you also made dogs and cats, straight up. When you own a dog, you determine when it's going to mate, when it's going to pee, when it's going to eat, when it's going to take a crap. You have to see that slavery, because once you start off with the idea of something as being beneath you, you are lost. I tell people, you'll find out on Judgment Day, you'll see a slave master and you might be in the same room waiting to get that train to hell with him. When you submit to another human being and let him do something to you, that violates God and violates the universe. During the slave trade, hundreds of thousands of Africans jumped off ships carrying them and died. Our revolts against slavery are what I like to focus on, as well as the ways slavery psychologically impacted all of society. Think about it. Somebody comes over to where you're living, someone you've never seen, because you've never seen white folks. They've come there to steal your children and to send you, the dad, to one place, the mama to someplace else, and the brother yet someplace else. During slavery, the women were of equal value to the men. Listen, there isn't another man in the world besides the black man who looks at his woman and says, I'm going to get some of that booty. Have you ever heard that word used referring to a woman of another race? You know what it means? The loot the pirate takes off the ship is called booty. So this woman who's never been liberated, what we call what she has, booty. I believe this is a direct result of our slave mentality. We arrive in a new land. The people in America do not speak my tongue and they do not practice my religion. Today, people laugh at me and want to know why I speak English so bad. Because when the whites brought me here, I wasn't speaking anything. Maybe my ancestors were speaking Swahili. That's why. They should not try to embarrass me. The same God that made the sun made me. I went and looked at all the 7 wonders of the world, and I came back and I said, wow, none of these wonders was made by God. How come the ocean isn't a 7th wonder of the world? I went to Egypt. A man there told me that Egypt has the 3rd largest tourist economy in the world. Everybody comes to see the pyramids. So the Egyptian said, I'd like for you and your friend to join us tonight where the super rich go to sleep under the pyramids. I said, man, look at this here. I pointed at my nose. That's the pyramid. You understand? As long as I sleep on my back, I get 1,000 times more energy than I get from that mess you're selling. My nose is a pyramid. God made it. The Middle Passage. Slavery in America didn't start with black folks. In the 1500s, people from Spain and Portugal were over here enslaving Indians and sending them back across the seas. That's what they called the natives living here, Indians, because when that dummy Christopher Columbus came here, he thought he had reached India, and the mistake stuck. So they took those poor Indians from their homes and sent them every which way to work in the mines and fields in the Caribbean, in Peru, and Panama, to name a few. The ones who hadn't already died from being exposed to European germs, that is. Then word got back to the King of Spain, Charles V, about how bad the Indians were being treated, and he outlawed slavery in the so-called New World. Of course, it wasn't new to the people who had been living there. Hello. Too bad Charles waited until after most of the natives had been worked to death or died of disease. Plus, Charles didn't have control over what the other European countries did. Even after Spain backed off, Portugal was still in the game. And then the Dutch got involved, and then there came the English. When the English started setting up colonies over here in the Americas in the 1600s, let me tell you, that was bad news for black folks. The English wanted slaves too. For a while, they did use poor white folks from back home as what they call indentured servants. Nothing in comparison to chattel slavery, which white people are always trying to compare it to. But that didn't work out too well, because they had to honor the servants' contracts of 7 years, 14 years, or else the servants ran away. And because the servants were white, they could blend right in with the rest of the settlers that had come over. Guess who couldn't blend in, people? Guess who couldn't blend in? And so, the English in other countries soon set their sights on Africans, and the slave business was on for real. Now, the Middle Passage, that's what they called the trip that brought slaves by ship from Africa to the Americas. Think for a second about why it's called the Middle Passage. For something to be in the middle, it's got to be between two other things. And those two other things tell you what the whole deal was really about. The Middle Passage was the second leg of the journey. The first leg started in Europe. Folks from countries like Spain and Portugal, but also England and France. The same folks we think of today when we think about grace and style and good manners. They went to Africa and traded some cheap crap they had made for live Africans. Notice I didn't say slaves. We weren't slaves till we got here. Then, on the Middle Passage, they brought the Africans to America and the Caribbean and traded these living, breathing people, or rather the ones who were still living and breathing after the Middle Passage, to white folks here for stuff they could take back with them to Europe. The third leg of the journey was the trip back across the ocean to the homes of these dainty, graceful, civilized, slave-trading Europeans. And he adds another word there, but I'm not going to say it. The main word here is trading. That's the whole thing. That's what the whole thing was about. The people who started the slave trade didn't hate Africans. They didn't hate black folks. They didn't care about you one way or another until they realized they could make money by capturing us and selling us as free labor. It was when the Africans got here and became American black folks that the real hating started. To justify keeping somebody as a slave, this is very important. Put an ear on the screen that you're listening. You bringing that ear in. To justify keeping somebody as a slave, you've got to say, and you've got to believe that that person is not a real human. That's the only way you could justify it. And the more human people seem to you, the more you've got to tell yourself they are not. If whites had admitted to themselves that they could treat other human beings in such a horrible manner, it would have meant admitting that they themselves had a problem being human and acting like human beings themselves. Selah. So, their questioning our humanity has more to do with them than it does with us. One of the reasons that racism doesn't end is because we're seen as a commodity, not as human beings. I'm going to say that one more time because some of y'all still don't get it. One of the reasons racism does not end is because we are seen as a commodity, not as human beings. I'm going to say it one more time. Why do you have 70% of the NFL is black men? I'm going to say it one more time for you. For the people in the back, as they say. There you go. We're seen as a commodity, not as human beings. You know and I know that the African brought over here on those slave ships were as human as anybody else. That's what makes thinking about what our ancestors endured during the Middle Passage so horrible. But we need to think about it because it's our history. Now, I've been to the African American Museum twice now, and I'm looking to go back a third time. One of my biggest criticisms that I have for the museum, it's beautiful, all right? Beautiful museum. I said I would tell black people that when you go to this museum, you should start at the top and work your way down to the bottom. All right? You really should start at our achievements and how far we've come and then work yourself backward into our history. I encourage white people when they go, you should do the exact opposite. You should start at the bottom, all right? because that's the part you never get taught most of the times. And then you should work your way up to the top, because that is what a lot of white people know about black people, but they're not being taught about how we started at the bottom. All right. So that's my suggestion. All right. But one of my criticisms about the museum is the fact that the area that has to do with telling what happened with the Middle Passage, it is very pristine. But the description that Dick Gregory is about to give you is not pristine. All right. For me, I said it was too pristine, and I could tell that it was done in such a way in order to not hurt white people's feelings. And maybe, the people that contributed monies to the museum didn't want to feel too much of the sorrow and the grief and the effects. Exactly, Prophet Lakia. It was done in such a way so that white people could stomach going through that part of the museum. But the reality was so much uglier than how that level of the museum is put together. All right. So that is my criticism, that, if you're expecting white people to go through that section of the museum and actually feel any kind of emotion or remorse or anything, you won't see it because of the way that the information is presented. All right. But let me give you Dick Gregory's presentation of the Middle Passage. Think about the last time you were on a bus or subway car on a hot summer day when the air condition wasn't working. You're squeezed in like socks in a drawer, fresh from the laundry. Except fresh is not the right word. The dude in front of you is sweating like a farmer. The dude behind you smells like he took a bath in pig manure. And pretty soon, you get to sweating and smelling your own self. Now imagine that instead of you all sitting or standing up, you're all lying down. Imagine that instead of just starting and stopping like a bus or a subway usually does, this thing you're on rises and falls like a roller coaster, making you sick to your stomach. And imagine that your stop never seems to come to an end. An hour passes, a day, a week, 2 weeks, but your stop still doesn't come. Then when it does come, you can't get off because you're shackled to the dude next to you. Maybe you start talking to each other. Pretty soon you're both crying because neither one of you knows where you're going or what's going to happen when you get there, or whether you'll ever see your wife or son or daughter or mother or brother again. Then you notice that you've been doing all the talking, and it's been a while since your new friend has said anything. Maybe he's sleeping. Then you realize that no, he's not sleeping, he's dead. Now you're really crying, or you would be, except the odor down there has gotten so bad that you start to vomit instead. Now there's vomit all over you and nothing in your stomach. And you don't know if there's ever going to be anything in your stomach because the people who brought you here haven't said a word about feeding you. Now they do bring you some food, but even if it weren't disgusting, which it is, you feel too sick to eat it. You eat it anyway because you've got to stay alive. That's the only thing you know. You've got to stay alive. It sounds like a nightmare the way I'm describing it, but real people went through that nightmare. Millions of real people, your ancestors and mine. Are you African American? Go back enough generations in your family, and there's somebody on one of those slave ships who went through what I've just told you about. Somebody just as real as your mama, probably looked like her too, and for good reason. Somebody just as real as you. Now think about that for a minute. How do you feel? Money and slavery. When it comes to slavery, what people don't think about is this. Most people who were buying slaves didn't have big money to buy them by the thousands. So, who put me or your ancestors on the boat and brought them here. It was the big money folks. There was another group that sold slaves like somebody today sells cars. Let's say you and your brother have a car dealership. You buy the cars from the automaker and I come and buy them from you. The bankers lend you the money to get the cars from General Motors. You pay for the cars and then you sell one to me. Slavery was like that. One guy bought slaves and sold them to another guy. But the part that's left out is this. Whom did the first guy buy them from? Who was the General Motors of the slave trade? For that, you've got to go to Europe, Portugal, England, France, and the Netherlands. They're the ones who came up with the idea. And this is fully documented at the new museum, okay? They're the ones who explored the routes to Africa, who brought the slaves from West Africa or else just took them, who then went from there to the Americas. They were the ones to make the very first profits. So when people talk about reparations, you don't just need to be asking America for reparations. No, 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 no. Let's go back to the people who were making the first profits. The Americans who bought the slaves made a profit too, because they turned around and sold them. The ones they sold them to also made a profit because the slaves did their work for free. But the real profits made in America off slavery went other places. Banks handled the money from slave profits, and slave owners paid insurance companies in case something happened to the slaves. And money men in the North made a fortune by investing in those banks and insurance companies that, you know, the ones that won't give you any other loan except the car loan. Those banks. In other words, the wealth of America was literally built on our backs. Many of those companies are still around. So when somebody says, well, I just don't see how we can go about paying these things back. I mean, you know, we don't really know where the money went. They're lying. It's on Wall Street. All right. Many of those companies are still around. Here are a few. JP Morgan, New York Life, Aetna, Lehman Brothers, and a whole lot more. Their money has been passed down from generation to generation of white descendants, and people are born into those families with wealth they didn't do a thing to earn. That's where real white guilt comes from. New report just came out. What did that report say? It said that whites are 62 times wealthier than blacks, and they are expecting the value of a black family to be 0 by 2050. Let me just sip my OJ. This is a money report. Just look it up. Type in the wealth of whites 62 times more and hit search and you'll find the article. Meanwhile, you and I were born without a pot to piss in, Dick Gregory says, or a window to throw it out of. Tell that to the next person who asks you, slavery's been over for 150 years. How come black people still don't have anything? What's wrong with you people? I don't understand. Why can't you all get yourselves together? I've heard it all, by the way. Why can't you people get yourselves together? Well, you have to understand where your wealth comes from. That your great grandmother and your grandmother and your mother passed down to you. You all just didn't pop up wealthy out of nowhere. All right? So we need to make sure we understand the whole story so we don't have people guilting us when they know the truth. All right? Don't fall for the guilt trip. How come black people still don't have anything? What's wrong with you? He says, The continuing inequality can make us angry sometimes, but let's not take it out on one another in our community. We need to struggle together, not against each other. Exactly. You did not just pop up wealthy. I know maybe your family told you that, but they need to start, some of these white people, grandparents, great-grandparents, y'all need to start telling the truth. Some of you all have not told your families where your wealth comes from. You need to start telling the truth. Especially if you say you're a believer, because God's going to hold you accountable for that truth you did not tell. Moving on. Nat Turner's revolt. Gosh, time is running out. Oh my goodness. I think we're going to get through Nat Turner. All right. Here's an example. Welcome. Here's an example of how white folks can take something we ought to be proud of and turn it against us and use it to mess up our minds. For those of you who are just coming in, I am reading from Dick Gregory's book, Defining Moments in Black History, Reading Between the Lies. This is a must read. Add to your curriculum if you're teaching from home, and especially if you're teaching black children, but take out some of the profanity that Dick Gregory does use. Okay? All right. Moving on. Nat Turner's revolt. Here's an example of how white folks can take something we ought to be proud of and turn it against us and use it to mess up our minds. Now, believe me, I'm not taking anything away from Nat Turner. More people should name their children Nat Turner instead of naming them after football players. Today, 150 some years after the end of slavery, some black folks' minds are still messed up, but it's not our fault. Yes, you are correct, Pastor Ben. Black towns that became wealthy were burned down and the people were murdered. Exactly. So when people say, where is the black wealth that was built up? Where is the legacy? The legacy was burned up by angry white mobs of jealous white people. Other part of history that they don't tell you about, but they keep saying, we don't understand why black people can't get ahead. Let's keep going. Today, 150 some years after the end of slavery, some black folks' minds are still messed up and it's not our fault. Anybody's mind would be off if all they had heard for hundreds of years was that they were nothing. But Nat Turner, that man was living in slavery and didn't let anybody mess up his mind. He didn't take his cues from the oppressor. He was born and enslaved in Virginia in 1800, and slavery was all he knew. Yet, he was able to see that that wasn't how things were supposed to be. He was able to resist what racists told him because he was in touch with a higher power. The thing about Nat Turner was, from the time he was a little boy, people around him, both black and white, saw that he was special. They figured he was going to do something great one day, even if he was a slave. If the white folks had known from the beginning what that something was, they would have killed him right then and there. The man who owned him even gave him a Bible, which Nat loved. His mother encouraged him because she thought he had so much potential. Later, Nat and his mother got sold together. After their new owner died, Nat was married by that time. Nat's wife got sold away. That didn't sit right with Nat. Matter of fact, that might have been one of the things that pushed him to do what he did. He was still religious, but he wasn't the turn the other cheek kind of religious. More like the I am God's instrument kind. He started praying, and then he started having visions from God, and everything he saw pointed to fighting against slavery. And when I say fight, I don't mean protest. He looked to the heavens for signs. On February 12, 1831, he saw a solar eclipse and took it as a sign that it was time to free his people. At first, he planned a revolt for July 4th. Isn't that something? That would have been an Independence Day, all right. Then he got sick, so he waited for another sign. One day in August, the sun turned a strange blue-green color, or so Turner thought it did, and that was the sign he was looking for. He planned the revolt for August 21st and started organizing. He met secretly with just a few others at first. Before they were done, their number grew to about 70, slaves and free blacks alike. The revolt started with Turner's master, Joseph Travis, and his family. Turner and his followers killed them all. Then they moved on to other families, and by the next day, they had killed 60 white people. A trail of blood like you never saw. They wouldn't have stopped there, but then came the federal troops. Turner and the others didn't go down without a fight. More than 100 slaves died, which is more than the number of white folks they killed, but the white folks left alive didn't forget the uprising. You can believe that. They were scared out of their minds. They captured Turner on October 30th and killed him on November 11th. Today, we celebrate Veterans Day on November 11th, but next time it's Veterans Day, think about Nat Turner. He sacrificed as much for his people as anybody wearing the uniform of the U.S. military. Everybody talks about Nat Turner, even those who don't know exactly what he did. And that's the problem. When people talk about slave revolts, his is the only name you hear. White folks would have you think that in almost 250 years of slavery, there was just this one dude with enough guts to say, I'm going to be free or die trying. As if every other slave who ever lived was either happy to be picking cotton and saying, yes, sir, 700 times a day, or too scared to do anything about it. I don't know if you've heard, but also, again, recently, a university president invited the black students at his college. I can't recall the college right now, but he invited the black students to the home of the president, and on their table as centerpieces, he had stalks of cotton. And he was asking them, how do they enjoy being at the school? In other words, he was deliberately provoking them with a symbol of their ancestors. Okay? When the students asked him, why did he have that as a centerpiece, this university president in 2017 had the nerve to say, well, we're all wearing cotton, so it must not be a bad thing, right? And then he moved on. That university president needs to be fired. He doesn't need to be disciplined. He doesn't need to be sat down. He needs to be fired. As one person said, I believe it was Prophet Lakia, you went out of your way to deliberately provoke a group of students and create a hostile environment in the university president's home while you supposedly invited them to dinner. You need to be fired. That's a whole other story. The truth is, there were a lot of slave revolts. For one thing, before Nat Turner, there was Denmark Vesey. Now, if you are a student of history, you know about Denmark Vesey, and you also know about the other slave revolts that were going on. Okay, and it wasn't just North Carolina and South Carolina that in Virginia that were having slave revolts. But before Nat Turner, there was Denmark Vesey. He was a free black man. He bought his freedom in 1800 and then worked as a carpenter in South Carolina. He made a good living, but he wasn't satisfied being free when other black folks were still under the lash. Now, here's something that we need to think about. In 1800s, Denmark Vesey was not satisfied with being free and making his own money and still looking at other black people and seeing them in bondage. In 2017, we have black people who don't care about the other black people that they're looking around and seeing who are still in bondage. Selah. So, he organized the revolt. You don't hear as much about Vesey as you do Nat Turner because Vesey's rebellion got uncovered before it could take place. Vesey and his crew were serious. They collected more than 500 daggers, bayonets, and spears. They would have used them too, but whites got wind of what was happening, and that was the end of that. Vesey and the others were executed. After Vesey and Turner, the revolts kept up. In 1835, whites hanged a bunch of slaves and whipped others to death because they were about to rebel. In 1853, in New Orleans, 2,500 slaves got ready to fight, but one free black man informed on them. One. You can believe that man is still burning in hell. If I have anything to say about it. In fact, I might throw some coals and kindling on the fire. A whole lot of black folks resisted slavery. Ever heard of Maroons? They were slaves who ran away, formed groups, and lived together. Some of them had been captured in Africa and put on ships, but ran away as soon as they reached America. A lot of them even tried to get back home. In 1856, a group of Maroons terrorized whites in a couple of counties in North Carolina. Whites got so scared and nervous, in fact, that they didn't know what to do. Some of them stopped sleeping. They just stayed up all night waiting for black people to try something else. The revolts I'm telling you about, these are just the ones somebody saw fit to write down. Nobody knows how many more there were. Vesey, Turner, and the Maroons were the blacks who took up arms. Other blacks fought slavery in other ways. Take a look at a piece of writing published in 1829 by a black man named David Walker called The Appeal. Walker was a free black man who wanted other blacks to be free too by killing their masters even if need be. Take a look at what Walker wrote. He said, "They want us for their slaves and think nothing of murdering us. And believe this, that it is no more harm for you to kill a man who is trying to kill you than it is for you to take a drink of water when thirsty. Don't let anybody tell you black people were just slaves and they were happy that way. Happy folks do not take up arms, and we took up arms to defend our freedom." I've read for you part of chapter 1 of Dick Gregory's book, Defining Moments in Black History, Reading Between the Lies. I know we are a little bit past time, but I want to just give you what we're going to cover next Tuesday. We're going to be looking at the life of Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Eli Whitney and the Cotton Gin, the Dred Scott decision, and the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. And if we have enough time, we might be able to get through Jocko, which are, I didn't see these until I moved to Virginia, by the way. There are these lanterns that look like black jockeys that actually sit on people's front porches, especially people who have homes like the size of plantations up here. And it's like a door light when you're like walking up their entrance. And so he explains, and he's going to go into detail about what that actually was. I've heard different versions of it, but he gives a good explanation. And then lastly, he talks about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And this is all in chapter 1. So we'll be back next Tuesday to finish up chapter 1. Well, I hope that you got something out of today's Daring Dialogues. Dick Gregory, as we know, has always been not just a comedic character, but he was also an activist and very controversial in some of the things that he had to say. But we do know that he was a truth teller. All right. So I want to thank you for your time and attention. Please share this video, share this broadcast. I hope that it was insightful. I hope that you will go back and research and type in some of those things that I referenced here and just click the search button and see what you find, and let your continued investment in your own knowledge continue. All right. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please today go out and be light somewhere, somehow. All right. Thank you so very much for your time. Take care and God bless.